Here we go. It's been so long since I've done this. It's been 2 months? I don't know. I can't even remember. I can't remember. I think once October hit, October and November I got too busy. So, let's see here. Today, we're going to talk about a podcast that I was listening to with a gentleman named Tim Ferris, I believe, and he had Jordan Peterson on. And the title was Psychedelics and the Bible. And I just thought, okay, perfect. This is going to be cool. And I think the video is only about a year old. Sorry, I'm scrolling through my notebook here. So I took some notes. Other thing I've done recently too, in the last couple weeks, is I've gone back and I've listened to all the old podcasts and taken notes on what I've talked about. And that was really fun, actually. Took a lot of notes on what I talked about and also things to improve on. So, and I did some editing too on those old ones as well. Hopefully, moving forward, I'll have to do less of that because I can just do some self-editing while I'm doing these things. And so that was really fun to go back and just. I didn't expect to have so much feedback for myself, and which isn't surprising, but it was a lot of fun. I don't know. Anytime you can do something like that, and you can get into the tweaking it and like reflecting on it, and then tweaking it, and there's that process to me is a lot of fun, and it makes things like worth trying in my mind because they're attainable. So you just got to push through and keep tweaking and reviewing. And so anyways, that was a lot of fun. So, all right, so let's just jump into this Tim Ferris and Jordan Peterson conversation. And it was really interesting. I did this yesterday, so I'm still and even this morning right now, normally I'm at the gym at this time, but I needed to come in and podcast. I've actually been almost been nervous to do it again. And so it just felt like, okay, I need to come in today and do this and get warmed up again. There's definitely processing power that you get to exercise when doing this regularly. And that I feel like I've kind of lost touch with the rhythm of that. And I was just experiencing getting into a deeper rhythm with it. And so I think that's part of the nerves to get back into it, is just knowing that I've got to go back and reestablish things that were already established there just for a brief second. And so anyways, let's do it. Let's do the dang thing. So my first note here I have is moral, because they were scared to get caught versus moral. I forget who Jordan Peterson is talking about. He's talking about I believe it's an author of no. I think it's Nietzsche. And I think if not, it's another philosopher. And he's just talking about this distinction between people who are moral because they're scared of getting caught and they're scared of the consequences. And so that's what keeps them moral versus people who are just moral because they know it's the right thing to do. And this is an interesting concept because this concept of doing the right thing when no one's watching, I think is interesting. Because I always used to kind of look at that in a way where I was in the situation in which I was doing the right thing, where no one was watching. I was by myself. And the other day I kind of had a thought, and I've talked about, how I've talked about with my temper, as I learned to hone it and oh yeah, just hone it and control it better as I got older. It was a thankless job, and so I could be in a room full of people, not lose my not have it, not lose my temper, and just play it off like nothing was wrong, and it would be essentially no one would see it. And that was just, it wasn't anything I got stuck on. I was just within the first easy, couple weeks or month of doing it, I just thought, oh, this is hilarious. Cause most external work, you like try to hit 10 shots in a row, and it's like, people can actually be like, oh dang man, yeah, great job, but we just watched you hit 10 shots in a row. But a lot of times, if you're doing a good job of not letting your emotions run things, you're playing it cool on the outside, and that's not all the time, but that's definitely a huge part of honing and channeling our emotions. And so that was kind of a new concept for me of doing the right thing, even though no one's watching, or when no one's watching, because it's again, that was one thing I recognized with that thought is I'm not controlling my temper for a thank you. I'm controlling my temper so that I can just be a good person. And so, yeah, that was just another way, just some of the internal work that we do, how that is the same thing, as the external work we do that people can see, right? It's like the internal work is a lot like doing something right when no one's watching. That's what a lot of the internal work looks like or feels like. And obviously over time, people will get to know you and, oh, that guy's a good guy. And there's, it's not a completely thankless job. It's the only reason why a social credit system is even, I think I heard Russell Brand talk about a social credit system and how there's already one in place. It's just more unspoken and it's not on paper. And so there is a social credit system, you get more bees with honey socially. And so, yeah, it's like we kind of already have these rules of code of conduct that exist. What justifies them is another conversation, but in who chooses them and when and that kind of stuff is a good conversation. But needless to say, the point, like I said, about people who are moral because they're scared versus people who are moral because they know it's the right thing to do. And people who are moral because they're scared, they would happily do the wrong thing when no one was watching. I just think that's also the craziest thing about the accountability that comes from God. Again and again, I just keep seeing with Jordan Peterson, he's got the psychological gospel. Something he said in this, Tim Ferris quoted Jordan Peterson on saying something along the lines, let's see here. I could remember it, but I just want to make sure I'm getting it right. So basically, Jordan Peterson was speaking of knowledge of the stories of the Bible as vital to proper psychological health. Again, and there you go. You got the psychological gospel, Again, this idea that the knowledge of the stories of the Bible as vital to proper psychology and health. So again, part of that's what I was going to say, is part of the accountability of God. And I was even talking to my dad about this as far as like quantum physics and the theory of the observer in the double split experiment or the double slit experiment. But I was just thinking about the fact that there is a God who is observing us and what that does for the concept of doing right when no one's watching, because God is always watching. And that's one thing that people hate about God, is that he's always watching. And people love to make that as weird and pervasive, and is like, un people like to make that unnatural. It's unnatural to have a God out there that's watching us all the time. I can't take the pressure, this and that. And I absolutely go, yeah, it is a lot of pressure to want to do the right thing when no one's watching. There is definitely some pressure that comes from that. But that pressure is justified in my mind. And the more you do the right thing when no one's watching, the better you get at it. The closer you are to the will of God, the stronger you are against temptation. And so doing the right thing when no one's watching is being in the will of God. It's one way. And so yeah, that was where the conversation started. And I just thought, I had never thought about people who were being moral just because they didn't want to get in trouble. And he was talking, I think, about that in regards to courage, because there are definitely times where I broke the law and stuff. And it was like, I had the confidence and the courage to go through with it, you know? And I stole a lot, you know, growing up from time to time. It wasn't like I had a problem, or, I mean, it's never a good thing to steal, but in my philosophy, I was confused about, do the ends justify the means, on some Robin Hood type stuff, can you steal money and then go feed the homeless? Or you live at a house with a bunch of struggling artists, and it feels like no one's, you guys are already making sacrifices. You guys are trying to fund your own creative projects with no money. And so, yeah, so you would steal, whether it was art supplies or money, so that you could make something, and again, I didn't do that a lot. I definitely had a roommate who did that a lot for his art supplies, from like different art stores. And he's kind of like an anarchist anyways, so he was just sticking it to the man. But for me, I just thought, like, this is where I had a bad understanding of God's grace as well. Even though God's grace does cover all sins, it's really there to extend to us some time to figure out whether or not our philosophy is right or not. And philosophy, I guess I mean theology as well. I just mean our philosophical approach to even how we practice Christianity. And so, yeah, but I definitely had the courage, my heart was in the right place, in the sense that I was willing to be courageous to do what I needed to do. But then I just needed to learn about what was real courage versus, I guess I needed to learn how to make God proud of the way I was being courageous. And there's this level of God being proud where I think he sees that we're sincere. And so he is proud of the fact that we're sincerely trying, because he wants us to be genuine and try despite the difficulty. And that's when, as I think, when we're younger and stuff, he's really seeing, like, okay, that Mark's really trying to figure this out. He is dead wrong, but I can see his heart, and he is really trying to figure it out. And as soon as it clicks in him how wrong this is, he's not going to do it again. And it was really nice for that to click into place, because that's where the straight and narrow gets even, I don't know, it gets more free. The thing about not walking the straight and narrow is that everything's possible. And I think that's the same thing Jordan Peterson and this was talking about in this thing about psychedelics, is it's like, well, is it really worth opening this box of, this Pandora's box, which is taking psychedelics, because no one knows what to do with the fact that if you take psychedelics, you have a religious experience. I think why no one knows what to do with that is everyone's trying to figure out, where does the religious experience come from? And people think because they're experiencing this what feels like these new levels of enlightenment and freedom, they think they are feeling what it feels like to be more free. And there's a reason why the straight and narrow is, there's more peace in it and there's more freedom in it. And it's because when stealing is no longer an option, you don't waste any time thinking about stealing. So you're more free to figure it out in the way that you're supposed to figure it out, which takes faith either way. If I'm going to smuggle drugs, I'm going to have faith that I'm going to complete the mission. You know what I'm saying? Like, I wouldn't do it if I didn't have faith that I was going to complete it. So it's the same thing with the straight and narrow. I'm going to have faith that if I get my wife pregnant, or even when I was younger, had I got my girlfriend pregnant, I would have had faith no matter. I mean, I don't have money now. And I've made the joke on the podcast, but I think I edited it out because of my delivery. But it was along the lines of, I'm out here making babies and I can't even make rent. And I think a lot of people would look at that statement and be like, that is the classic case for abortion, right? And I want to just be the voice of people that says, forget that. You can have a kid whenever God put us here to what was it? To be fruitful and multiply. So we're not going to have faith that he is going to take care of us in doing that? And he tells us in Matthew, he tells us about anxiety and look at the birds, God provides for the birds. And yet, do you not think he loves us that much more than birds? And so if he takes care of them, don't you think he's going to take care of us? And I get it, because we live in insurance land, or in life insurance and health insurance and Apple Care insurance. And, it's like, it just blows my mind that it doesn't blow my mind. I get it, especially from a market standpoint and from a business standpoint. But I also just get having the faith in God that it takes. And guess what? Sure, it would be nice to have more money and do some things, but is that ultimately where I'm getting my peace from? No, absolutely not. And so, matter of fact, in America, especially, we can do a lot more than we give ourselves credit for, as far as like how we're actually able to live resourcefully here. We have more resources than a lot of other people, even if we're under the poverty line. I want to encourage. I was talking to someone the other day him and his wife are going to be 30, or he's 30, she's going to be 30 soon, and they're like thinking about kids. I'm like, you should have the kids. You should have the kids, because you're probably going to think about having another kid. And it's wild to not think about some of that stuff. I mean, I would imagine like I do, I feel really grateful to have had a son when I did. And then, to be talking about having another kid at my age, I'm old, but I'm still grateful for the time that I will have with my kids, God willing, so, but a lot of people, again, I mean, if you have a kid at 30 and you wait till 30, you have a kid at 30, that kid's 3, you have another kid. So by the time that kid is, your first kid is maybe 4, close to 4, the next one's born. And if you're 34 at that point, and la. I mean, I know people think about it sometimes, but it's like crazy when you're actually in it, how much it feels like important decisions. Whereas before you feel like, well, whatever happens, which is fine. But because we are in probably the heyday of abortions, I want to just be a voice for people to say, have kids. And we also live in the time where population control or overpopulation is being thrown around, which I believe is demonic. They're demonic concepts that again, you have a bunch of people who are starting at the one with science, and they're going to tell us about overpopulation and global warming and yada yada. And I go, okay, that's what happens when your foundation is, when you don't start at the root of the foundation, then you're going to get stuff that creates demonic. And also what I mean by demonic is just like perverted ideologies that go against what God has promised us. So I say have kids, have 2, have 3. Even if you're broke, you guys, sure, your priorities are going to shift to family. But Jordan Peterson talks about in this video, he talks about the, let me see. Basically, he's saying having a family, like getting your act together, finding someone to commit, to devote your life to, and having a family, if you're overwhelmed by life, that's a good place to start to get your life put together. And then he said, why? And he said, because that's what people do. That's the best we've been able to manage to do since the beginning of us. So he's basically just saying that if you are lost, like if you and your wife or you and your girlfriend you're not quite sure what to do, it's like the next thing to do is take on even more responsibility, or else you guys are going to feel like you're not living up to your fullest potential. And people will have a lot of reasons for not doing that. And it's the same thing. Like I could have a lot of reasons for stealing money, but by stealing the money, I'm not living up to my fullest potential, which is what God has in mind, which is a way in which I can continue to live where I'm not, stealing, and where God is continuing to provide. And it's the same thing with kids, you just have to trust that he's going to continue to provide. Yeah. And it's the same thing with that concept of, being overwhelmed, and then all of a sudden, finding someone to devote your life to. When you find one person to devote your life to, all the options of everyone else out there go away. And you would think that because you're limited now to one person, that there's less freedom. But the rules to freedom just change in a way that is better for you and for everyone else. And so that's another way in which walking the straight and narrow, you have more freedom in a committed relationship than you do in an open relationship. And that's, it's the same thing, opening Pandora's box with the idea of psychedelics is interesting, because as much as it feels like it has the potential to open you up and set you straight in a way, there's the thing that they talk about with psychedelics in this was an ontological shock. So this is basically where you take like psychedelics, and all of a sudden reality as you know it, your worldview as you know it, is challenged, and you start to question it, and it rocks you. And but the reason it rocks you is because it puts you somewhere on like the edge of where terror and awe meet. And Jordan Peterson talked about the disruption of our fundamental axioms. So yeah, if you think there is no such thing as the spiritual world, and then you take psychedelics, and then you encounter some spirits, or you feel like the most spiritual you've ever felt, and then that changes the way you see relationships and the way you see our value system, and then that definitely can be terrifying, because you can go, wait a sec. It's almost like, and it's even deeper, but it's like not being able to see and then being able to see all of a sudden. And forgot I was reading a book. I don't know if it was C.S. Lewis or what, but it was about a blind guy who older in his life, like basically he got his vision restored later in his life. And so he was like really trying to enjoy it and figure it out, but it was just so weird to him. He didn't even understand light. And then there was one part in the book where he's like reading Braille again, and he just like is so how comforting it is for him to like close his eyes and just go back to reading Braille. And so it's just, yeah, it that's kind of what it's like when you go into some sort of a ontological shock, right? All the fundamental ways in which you view the world shift, and it can produce post-traumatic stress. So some people it can if you're going in there to heal trauma, some people it can re-traumatize, and that's wild, because you can use it properly or improperly, and even if you use, I guess that's wild, because even if you use it properly, you still risk re-traumatizing people. There's this Hopkins study that it was the mushrooms' effect on the worldview of religious leaders of different faiths. So I would imagine they're giving people mushrooms and then kind of having them assess how they think and feel about different religious leaders from different religions around the world. And Jordan Peterson says, is it the mushrooms effect on people, or is it a religious effect? And again, this kind of like, how do we classify? This is really where I think the enemy blurs the lines. Anywhere where, and I think that's even a part of like a lot of psychedelic practices, is that you blur the lines, right? You blur you are trying to find the space in between. Even you're really trying to also manipulate the way our eyes were created to see into a different part of reality, and which is incredibly crafty. To study the eyes so well that you begin to manipulate and reality sounds incredible. It's like, maybe we should be living in this new reality that we're tapping into. But again, we don't know what to do with any of this. And my point that I keep making, and I think Jordan did in this, is, and it's other people too. People want to talk about flying to space or conquering the DMT, mapping the DMT world. And it's like, what did he say? We have oh God, what did he say? Hold on. Yeah, we don't know what to do about this. Where is the religious experience or the spiritual experience coming from on psychedelics, or just in general? We don't know what to do with that. It's a bottomless, I think he described it. Yeah, it's a bottomless mystery, and that we don't know what to do with. But we don't know what to do with what we don't know what to do with already, he's saying. So he's saying here we are opening Pandora's box. It's the same thing with going to space, right? Like, but even more so with this too, with psychedelics, because we really just don't know. Here we are introducing new dimensions to be responsible for on some level. Or here we are introducing new territory to be responsible for, and we don't even know how to be responsible with our own kids. We don't even know how to be responsible when it comes to procreating. And that's like how we all get here. It's so important. And we just kind of like throw these solutions at it that we think, by our understanding, it's a great solution. But by the grand scheme of things, the grand design, we're so far off base. Killing babies is not aborting babies is not the solution. We got plenty of issues and plenty of things we don't know what to do with here on Earth now, that we should be tending to. And the argument, right, is that, psychedelics can help you maybe tend to those things, which I have experienced, and I agree that I have gained insight for sure. I told Sam yesterday that I think what I did on psychedelics gave me an education that it definitely made me smarter. I hate to say it, but I was not using my brain fully. It woke up the fact that I was all heart and all emotion, and that there was a huge disconnect between my logic and my heart and my, my mind and my logic and my heart and my emotions. And then I was able to finally start connecting the two. Now, I think I could have figured that out with just God's help without psychedelics. I don't know if it would have happened as quick. Maybe it would have, but this is where I give some of the credit to the experience, but I give all, like, put credit where it's due, but really it's like, it's the same thing with weed. It's like people love smoking weed. Oh, I just love weed. Oh, I love weed. And it's like, as much as I love weed, I loved God who created it more. But yeah, I mean, any of the growth, again, it's a part of the integration process. Like, how do you integrate all the great things that you tapped into on psychedelics and sustain it? And also then how do you begin to justify it? And how do you, and I think some people, like, I was listening to a podcast the other day. I won't name any names, but the guy had like this guy on, and they were talking about psychedelics in the Bible. And this guy was, which I've heard these theories, like there was ayahuasca and the cup of the Last Supper, and Moses was on DMT for the burning bush, and like, cannabis they use and the oil that they anoint people with and all this stuff. And I just go, this guy in the podcast was talking about how, the different oils, the different ingredients and some of the oils and the incense and stuff that they were using back then, and how they're either enzyme inhibitors or aphrodisiacs or whatever, and they basically, that this stuff was, especially in the temple with the high priest, when they'd go into this room, and it would be like an enclosed room that all this stuff would kind of like hotbox the room, and these guys would get super high and talk to angels. And I just go, that, even if that were true, which I don't think it's true. I don't think it's true in the way that this guy is saying it's true. Like, I don't mind those things having an effect on people, but those things are not the sole cause of, like, too many people feel Christ sober for it to be, and again, he is talking about the Old Testament before we had access to the Holy Spirit. So I don't know. That's a good question as far as, what kind of, I mean, if we as after Christ get the Holy Spirit, what kind of spirit were people before Jesus interacting with? Obviously is with God, but I just go, there was something about, and maybe it is the Holy Spirit. It was just maybe like the priest and people, maybe it still was the Holy Spirit. It just wasn't as accessible to us, to everyone. Maybe it was accessible to some of the priests and people, but it wasn't accessible to the layman like it was after Christ. But I still go, from my experience, none of the stuff that, just because MDMA mimicked the Holy Spirit, what the Holy Spirit felt like on some level, MDMA can never mimic the truth that the Holy Spirit has to offer. MDMA ceremonies can't steer you in the right direction the way the Holy Spirit can. And that's where we really have to be careful, because just like Jordan Peterson was saying, this opens you up to things we know nothing about and that are spiritual. And so it's like you can just as easily as you can have a great trip, you can have a bad trip. Just as easily as you feel like you could talk to your ancestors, you could see some demons. And so again, yeah, I just go for this guy in the podcast. I just, like I said, I just felt for him. Okay, that's what I was going to say is the guy hosting the podcast was like blown away by this guy and was like, wow, like cool, the psychedelics in the Bible. Like that's awesome. And it just is so funny to me because it's like there's just different contingencies that I see the enemy trying to use as a way to just manipulate and distract people from the truth. And so like these contingencies, like you got to get high to feel God, or like you got to get high to have a spiritual experience, or, you got to do these, like the value of your life depends on how many spiritual experiences you have, or the meaning that the more of those you have, the more meaningful your life is. And I go, man, not enough people, and you can just tell because of the divorce rate, you can just tell because of the rate of abortions, enough people haven't given it a full-on go. Enough people haven't put in enough to feel the reward of the commitment and the value system that God has put in place. And so they just build their own one because it's like, they can have a cheat day and feel good about it. And the reason why I ever feel good about any day that I ever cheated wasn't because I thought my values were right. It was just because I knew that my values were wrong, and God assured me that they were wrong and that I was made for something better. And so this guy on the podcast, it's like, there is the idea that, all the 500 witnesses, the 500 people that said that they saw Jesus, raised from the dead, right? There's a theory that they all hallucinated, right? And then there's been this common thing that other people say where they go, well, no one hallucinates the same thing. But this guy's point, and Jordan Peterson touches on it in this other podcast, but this guy's point is that now with DMT, everyone has their own experience, but it's very similar, and they see a lot of the same things that other people do. So it's like, is this a shared hallucination? And so then that's when this guy starts to use that as a means to justify the fact that there was 500 people saw Jesus walking around, or the transfiguration of where Jesus shows his spiritual self, and like it's just like everyone's just like hallucinating at the same time, and that's why these things are happening. God has the power, and what's funny is this guy actually thinks that the gods are in our mind. So again, this is just another psychological take on the Bible. And that, we were born with all the gods in our mind, but there is one God, and we'll figure it out, and we'll figure it out through this process of enlightenment and opening up, and again, I go, yeah, it's like, and he's sitting there, he's sitting there like, you just got to go to the Bible and read it to figure this stuff out. And he knows, Hebrew and this, and it's like very like the guy hosting the podcast is just a comedian, and he's just like, whoa, dude, this is amazing stuff. And it's like, it's just wild to me that, and it's my problem too, you can't just read one book on a subject and act like you know what you're talking about. And it's like, I just don't know if this guy has read any early church fathers, or like where he's getting this information from. but it doesn't surprise me in the sense that these are people who are looking to meet meaning kind of where they're at. And the whole thing about, and I think maybe where they're at logically and psychologically, but there's the thing about God is he is so big that, again, this level of accountability to this fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It feels very different to me if the gospel is just a psychological stories, which Jordan Peterson is very convinced on. He doesn't understand the relationship of religion to story narrative. It's a giant mystery to him, which he's right, but we can still, I guess he's right, but I think through continual research, that's the other thing, right? Like the truth, we can know truth by logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and experiential relevance. So right now, it's logically consistent to Jordan Peterson, the Bible. It's historically accurate, even on some level, even if it's not completely, like, let's just say the resurrection didn't really, really happen. There's still enough historical accuracy in even when the Bible was written and composed and all these things for him to take it as the most important story. But the experiential relevance for him is going to be the thing I think that actually seals the deal, because experiencing God not on psychedelics, and in little ways in which you might not notice it, or you might not even call it God, or some might not call it God, but some would experience. I mean, just again, even in this walking the straight and narrow, and people who praise God and walk the straight and narrow, and the peace that they experience, and the love that they experience, and the acceptance that they experience, it's like some of these people are already as full of love as the dude on psychedelics. And that's like the craziest trip to me, is that like, here I am, I had all this love for people, and I kind of thought like I was a dork. I kind of thought like I wasn't as cool as them. I thought I wasn't as courageous as them. I thought, because I just thought that people were getting where they were going on their own. And I thought that was more meaningful on some level, than just being obedient. But the courage thing had a lot for me. It was the biggest tempter, was like, I don't want to I want to face my fears. You just hear about these kind of shamanic and ceremonial experiences, and people, you're like, whoa, can I handle that? But it just, how do you even begin to compare and quantify the levels of value in the types of categories between someone who takes psychedelics and anyone of any other spiritual practices? I mean, how do we quantify values? It's like, we know it when we see it, just like Jordan Peterson as a psychologist can observe other patterns in life, that like, such as like, just body language, and even like other nonverbal communication. And it's like, sometimes, like, we don't, again, I can't on a numeric level tell you, that, let's see, Jordan Peterson is more valuable of a person than, okay, I guess it's not the value, it's not how valuable the person is per se, it's how well the person embodies these values. And so when, there are ways, like, I just think about like someone like Bill Burr, right? It's like someone like Jordan Peterson to me offers his values, his how do I begin to quantify the value system between someone like Bill Burr and Jordan Peterson? Because it's trickier than we think, right? Bill Burr adds so much, and so does Jordan Peterson, to people in different ways, and no one knows who they are completely, even in their thoughts, right? God is the only person who really knows what's going on, even in our thoughts all the time too. And we're real good at hiding things. And so, yeah, I just go when in this conversation about, I don't know, which came first, God or mushrooms. And then yeah, it's like, again, then we just have to, it's a value system conversation. So I'm like bouncing so much around on this thing. I'm going to try and go back to the beginning, and get back on track somehow. All right. So the best, Jordan Peterson was talking about, the best people I've ever met are dangerous people, but they keep themselves in check. And I think that's something I feel like I can do. Especially when I was doing psychedelics, I just felt like my ability to keep myself in check. And again, that ability to do that came from just inviting God to the party with me, bringing Jesus with me wherever I went. And I was experimenting and building awareness around that. What did that feel like? And it's not only just like sensory based. I mean, there are like, you could just, well, it's not only experiential based. There's also learning from other people's, mistakes, and learning from the Bible. And so, but yeah, I just feel like why is it that the best people he's ever met are dangerous people that keep themselves in check? And again, here we are on the edge of terror and awe. And there seems to be something there, a bottomless pit of mystery. So, Jordan Peterson is also talking about cultivating standing up for what you believe in, because Tim was asking him about just like how Jordan, he was complimenting Jordan on how well he does when he's under attack in these interviews and conversations and stuff, or on panels. And he asks Jordan, how do you get good at standing up for yourself in that way? And he just says, obviously practice, and a way in which I see people being able to practice that from early on. Like I said, the sooner you realize that, to thank God for your trials and tribulations, because they're going to make you stronger, better, and give you more character and more hope, more perseverance, the better. The sooner you can then stand up for what you believe. And when people are going after you, he says, just observe. That's one thing Jordan Peterson does. He just observes and watches what they're up to. And so then he kind of distinguishes the difference between thinking and paying attention, and when you're thinking, you're painting a picture, you're running a train of thought, you're doing something. And when you're paying attention, you're observing, and you're more just letting your mind go where it will. And so the best thing to do when you're under attack is to sit there. And of course, because of his clinical practice, he's got good insight into what's happening with people. Therefore, he knows how to read, the cues for when to sit back and just pay attention and figure out where what things are up, what people are up to and what's going on. And I think that's a big part of the keeping yourself in check that he brought up, because openness and putting yourself out there is dangerous. So what allows someone to do that? It's the keeping themselves in check. And so I think that's a great distinction to make in when you're doing something dangerous. When do you go back to paying attention to figure out where someone is going or what's up? And I think that's something that I love to do on psychedelics. So like what I was trying to connect there is like on psychedelics, for me, there is thinking and there is paying attention. By the grace of God, I feel like I was able to do the right amount or he was able to protect me, because I think you can overthink or you can get manipulated by paying too much attention, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but I could break that down later at some point. But yeah, the when life is dangerous. It's seeking the truth is dangerous. Like, the only thing that playing it safe is not dangerous. And we all know what playing it safe looks like. And we know kind of how it feels. And we all have our feeling about what it's like to live 10 years of playing it safe. And you could look at the bright side however you want, and I think there is a bright side to that. But that's not what's going to, well, that's only part of the equation for our existence on life, right? Playing it safe versus risking it. So, and we'll get into that a little more here soon. But he also started talking about his book a little bit, and he was talking, I think one of the chapters was resentful, deceitful, arrogant, and how you just need to not be any of these three things. These are like the trichotomy of evil, or, and so if you're feeling resentful, there's something you need to say, there's something you need to stand up for, and which we'll get into that a little more in a second. But anger, as far as one thing I loved the term that he used was psychological resources. And he talked about how in anger, you burn off a lot of psychological resources, because when you're angry, you're gearing yourself up for the unexpected, the unknown, which just takes a lot of awareness, or a lot of potential awareness. And he said it's easy for people to think that they are better than they are, which I think is one of the truest things he says in this. For me, I don't think I've talked about Humble Bumble, and I've had a long, since I was 18, I've used Humble Bumble as like an art name, but I've always just had like this problem with using the word humble, because I know at times how not humble I am. But I have kept to it, because really it's Humble Bumble to me is the alter ego, or not the alter ego. It's the part of me that I would like to enhance. I would like to highlight, as opposed to the other part of me, And so there are all these times where I can feel myself, where I go, maybe I'm thinking I'm better than I really am. And those are the moments that I actually, because of this Humble Bumble concept, I always take the time to think about, I take the time to think about, like the fact that, like, even if my music was super meaningful to a generation of people, that's only one generation of people. It's really not that many people. It's really like, you're really not that big of a deal. And it's like, it's the same thing that it's same with basketball, and what I was talking about in one of the other podcasts, where when I said I don't feel funny, or I don't feel like, it's the only reason why I talk about myself to, let's just say, Sam or some other, some close friends, or Zane, about me playing basketball the way I do, is because I've heard other people do it, and I go, it's kind of fun. But the reality is I don't care. I'm not out there to be the best. I'm out there because I'm out there to compete against myself, which is like I'm out there to compete the best against myself. And that, if that places me in some sort of category of best, then that's fine. But it's really not that gets me to do that. It's the feeling of doing it that gets me to do it. It's just it's the love of it that gets me to do it. It's not the headiness of it, or where any of that, although that is a part of it, it's a very, very small part of it. But it's funny to me when I watch other players who part of loving the game is incorporating that aspect of the game. And I just think I appreciate it, but I just go, I know that there's so many people who are better than me, that I just go, I want to keep my mouth shut, But it's also fun. Like talking shit is fun, because there's a mental fortitude that comes along with it. And sometimes it's just a different way to express it. But that's even why I'm like, I'm not so upset. I don't stay upset about where I'm at in my career because I just go, if I was better, I'd probably be more successful. You know, I could blame it on a lot of different things. But there's my overall, sure, if I had a team of people, I could show up, and sure, if I had, you know, like I'm definitely the workhorse that if you tell him where and when to go, I'll be there consistently. And so maybe I have a hard time, like part of what I'm not good at is the numbers business side of running your own business or booking your own tours or blah, blah, blah. But needless to say, if I was that overwhelmingly talented by just a video performance of me, I feel like it would that like I'm not like the shock 'em first time you hear me kind of person. I don't think I'm the like you got to get to know me, and then you'll learn to appreciate. Oh, this guy's coming from his own place, but I definitely don't think that. I definitely see how it's easy for us to think that we are better than we are, or that we deserve. It's unfair that we haven't gotten somewhere in life by now. All right, edit all that out later. Okay, here's another thing Jordan Peterson says. When you decide to devote the rest of your life with someone, you're now in a category that requires a certain amount of respect. So your partner, yeah, okay, I'll stop there. So yeah, which is true. So he uses the example, your partner takes a shot at you in public, right? They say something and then it bugs you, and then you don't say anything to your partner, because you don't want them to think that you're that weak of a person, or that actually affected that you want them to think like that didn't phase you. And again, this is all coming from now going back to the concept of resentment, right? Something needing to be said. And I've talked about this in the podcast, risking, how much are you willing to risk to have the conversation and say the things that you need to say to your partner? And that's on an ongoing basis. There's a level of consistency. There's a rate in which that needs to happen, for communication to flow, which means that, yeah, sometimes it does it. And then sometimes like it does it pretty easily. And then sometimes you come up to a bigger thing where you're like, dang, we've even been good at communicating and I don't want to talk about this. And so there's a risk level involved. And so he was basically, I don't know where I'm just like super emotional, I guess. And so I like have to have, like, I've always tried to find people to communicate at this level with. And it's just always so hard. And I've always just found myself having to kind of water myself down, which I actually am grateful for, because I wouldn't want to do this all the time. Matter of fact, me and Sam have gotten the closest to it, and me and Zane have gotten the closest to it. And there are times where you're just like, let's just shut it off, dude. And but this concept, or this idea of like me and Sam being out in public and her saying something in front of some friends where I'm just like, ugh, like I wouldn't do that to you, or that's not how I want to be treated. Or I've said something to her. I've always said something to people, in the past, like not really friends, but like mostly like just partners. And I think, again, that's the point here, is like when you're dating someone and you're entertaining maybe being with them for the rest of your life, right? There's like, you enter into a certain, a new category, right? Like, especially devoting your life to someone, you're in this new category of respect. So the level of respect that you give each other is unlike any other. And so in the situation when I was growing up, I'd always think like, when I would tell girlfriends like, hey, I didn't like that you did that, and I would be like frustrated about it or whatever. Like, some of them just couldn't take it, and some of them were chill, but I used to feel really bad about that. Like I knew I meant well, and I knew I was being honest, but like there was a time where I started to feel like insecure about that fact. And it's just interesting now, especially after getting into philosophy, psychology, and relationships more, and exploring emotions, it's just crazy to me how much of a tool it is, and how much of a tool it is to that I've had to hone, and and how grateful I am for that tool ultimately. And so yeah, me and there's that thing for me is always on, and Sam is always usually responsive, and we're both in that, me more so than her. And and it's interesting because in those moments, right, where let's just say Sam says something to our friends about me, or a joke or whatever, and I take it personally, am I taking it personally because it hit a weak spot and an insecurity in me, or am I taking it personally because that person is just coming off like power hungry and they're playing some sort of power game? And both of those, it's like either way, you're going to have to work that out, because if you don't, the resentment is going to build. And yeah, there's only, the truth will set you free. Taking responsibility for your feelings will set you free. It will set you up for success as well. But yeah, this idea of like paying attention to figure out what people are up to and seeing where things are going, right? You can start to develop some pattern recognition. And that's the craziest thing, is like everyone's behavior is unique in the sense that it's got its own kind of like algorithmic pattern, but it's we all it's the same for everyone in that sense. So it's like the psychedelic experience. It's like, sure, we all might have a different experience, but we're all on some level experiencing something very similar. And so it's the same thing with like this idea, this the heart language in which we communicate to people with, in which we want to be communicated to by. There are certain patterns in that frame of work that come up, and they're seeable and they're recognizable in a different way. It's the way you recognize the quirky behavior of, or the even some of the unawareness in behavior from your partner is so important, because you guys are mirrors for each other. And it's insanity to live with someone and observe them and pay attention to and love them enough to try to figure out what they're up to, and to try to connect with them on, I mean, because right, so much of marriage is building in the same direction, right? So you're looking off at the same point in the distance. And so like you want to be you want to have assurance that you guys are both looking off at the same point in the distance together, right? And you want to have assurance that each other is kind of trying to figure each other out, because there's a level of, when you're trying to figure someone else out, there's a level of selflessness involved with it. And at least there can be, and there can be, if the intention is to build and grow through this devotion, then it's insanity to continue to do that. And when someone says something about you, you just deny it. And we have too many forms of like recording ourselves talking, filming ourselves with video, to too many ways to watch ourselves, to not take the time to actually review the footage. Because the more I can trust that when Sam has a pattern recognition, recognizes a pattern in my life that that's unhealthy or quirky, or maybe even just not efficient, I'm not as effective as I could be if I were to change something. It only works if our intention is to build and grow in the relationship. And in what areas are we willing to do that? Is that all areas, any areas, all the time, anytime? And that all is just, that's the level of willingness willingness to participate. I think that there's a level of value in willingness to participate, that and build with people in a certain way we value so much, that if we're not able to do that, then we might as well take some sort of a psychedelic to get us maybe to that place. So there's again, this is just that Jordan Peterson was talking about this too. There's genuine peace versus hiding things in the fog and sweeping things under the rug. So there's too many times in relationships where people just, maybe they just, let's just move to Hawaii. And then they're happy in Hawaii for a couple years. And then boom, all the issues come back. That's like the biggest joke about that. That's the one of the calls to Christianity that I love is that Tucson, so many times I haven't wanted to live here. Majority of my time here as an adult since I've been back from LA, I would say out of the 10 years I've been back here, 5 of the years I haven't wanted to be here. And during any time I know, any of those times where I go, okay, I don't want to be here. I know that I'm not putting if it's affecting me on a certain level, I know I'm not putting enough faith in God and where he has me at the moment. And that's one of the calls to Christianity that I love is just be grateful for where you're at and put your trust that that he has you right where he wants you. So I'm willing to submit that I know what's better. I'm willing to submit to God that he knows what's better more than I do about where I'm at. And I remember it's so fun. I remember taking Molly and deciding to go with some friends and deciding that me and my friend were going to move out to the East Coast from California to DC and go live with my friend. And it was like, if you knew the context, it felt kind of random, but it also felt like I was catching a wave, like we were going to catch a wave, right? And there is something fun. I mean, the reason why I am enjoying submitting my will to God's will is because I used my will so hard. I exercised it to the greatest of my ability as far as like, okay, I just want to do what I want to do. I want to be spontaneous, and spontaneity is the way in which I'm going to go to the school of spontaneity. And that was like what I was studying, a life of improvisation, and which is fun. It's great, and I would say some Christian missionaries are living that life right now in the will of God. And same with someone like Arthur Blessed, just one of my heroes. Like, I just think he lived a very spontaneous life in the will of God. And so there is that, there's both, there's this spontaneity, and then there's the more staying in one place where you feel like you don't necessarily want to be, but you're going to do it. Even in spontaneity, you're going to feel like you're somewhere where you don't want to be at times. And so the real accountability is just to be grateful for where God has you. So there's this that and then tied in with our level to ability to communicate. So like now, genuine peace for me comes from the fact that I'm not sweeping things under the rug. That's kind of more of like a psychophysiological way, like area. It's like, oh yeah, the fact that I'm being honest does, again, when you're walking the straight and narrow and you're being honest, you have to think about less lies, right? So there's more freedom to just be you, because you don't have to cover up so much with all the lies. It's a lot of things to remember when you lie to people. When you just live honestly and tell the truth, you don't really you just do it, You don't have to worry about whether you're going to remember what really happened or not. And there's a genuine peace that comes from, directness and communicating, because the peace is genuine because you've worked hard for it. You've tilled the soil so that what's coming up is genuine, as opposed to, using some artificial thing last minute where you get just enough greens to eat. The genuine piece, it's quality and quantity. And with the sweeping under the rug, it's like synthetic, it's artificial, and it's scarce. And so that's like that, the resentment, all that stuff, it just comes from that like, if you're resentful, then it's because you don't want to do the work to have genuine peace. But there's a genuine peace that surpasses any situation we're in at the moment, and our level of understanding, awareness, and knowledge about that situation. You could be lost, and still have peace. That comes genuine peace that surpasses all understanding, that comes from Christ. And again, this is not the psychological Christ. This is not you can have a level of peace by just believing in Christ. Like, look at Jordan Peterson's life. And granted, he's in the hot seat, and he's doing the courageous thing. He's doing the manly thing. He's doing the right thing. He's doing the godly thing. But he doesn't have historical, real, true life Jesus in his heart yet. He is ever so close. I mean, I don't see him not getting there. I would be shocked if he didn't get there. I think the fact that he's taking his time, he's just leading this giant breadcrumb trail from all the people who put psychology above God, and they're all going to follow his little breadcrumb trail, boom, and discover Jesus Christ, the historical Jesus Christ. Here's the other thing he brings up, people casual about tradition. So it's this part of his book where he basically is saying, like, don't casually criticize social institutions or creative achievements. And nowadays it's true. People are just so casual about tradition and overthrowing the patriarchy, and everything we did before was dumb and we got nothing right. When it comes to family, when it comes to being intimate, when it comes to your job and your career, when it comes to like the relationship to, how you use your time outside of work or none of us really figured anything out right. So like tradition really is just all about like the emergence of new stuff and not about tradition. And it's like, okay, well, just wait till you get older and now the new stuff is emerging. And you go, wait a second. We worked really hard on this one aspect and it's true. This is truly valuable. And we can prove it's truly valuable actually by going back in time and being able to prove its value throughout history. Or we can prove it's valuable by look at the impact it had. And we're like, yeah, that's old impact though. We really only can use new impact because that's how we get where we're going. And so these things about like, these were certain questions that he asked, like, what about intimate relationships? What about family relationships? What about job or career? Do you know how to use your time outside of work productively? Do you take care of your psychological and mental health? Do you manage temptation effectively? Are you as educated as you are intelligent? Which I loved. That one was super inspiring. Standard patterns of activities in the world. If you're overwhelmed by life, that's a good place to start to put your life together. So standard patterns of activity. Again, I talk about this ideal situation for bringing a kid in the world. Is it the same thing then to say that the most ideal that we can strive for should be the standard pattern of activities in the world? What should be the standard that should it be the most ideal, the most healthy, or should everyone just be striving for whatever the best that they can do? Because if you're overwhelmed by life, that's a good place to start, right? And this is what we talked about earlier. because that's what people do. That's the best we've managed to be able, that's the best we've been able to manage over time, is intimate relationship with someone, starting a family with someone, having a job and a career, making productive use of your time outside of work, taking care of your physical and mental health, managing the temptations of life that everyone struggles with. That's common to man. Are you as educated as you are intelligent? Woo! I mean, like me, I feel like I could be more educated. I feel like yeah. And, yeah, we have gotten here for a reason, because guess what? When I wake up and me and Sam hug Malachi, and all three of us, mommy, daddy, and boy, have a hug in the morning, that kid is stoked. To be able to run from mom over to dad, one kid having those two different energetic forces, and not only, I mean, just even more than energetic, but just, yeah, like just the two different energies. And those energies being the energy that created him. That is the healthiest. That is a standard pattern of activity in the world. Even though we're at 50% of people stay married or whatever, it's like, it's still a lot. It's still enough to say, no, this is the way things should be. Sure, we have grace, and sure, God is merciful, and so are we, and we're all patient, and we work with each other, and maybe not everyone can stay married, and yada yada, but that doesn't mean that we go ahead and tell people, okay, go ahead and, improvise your life to the point in which you sacrifice the things that hold the fabric of reality together. Like, he talked about this guy who got into the origins of Christmas, and then basically told his family, like, I don't want to spend Christmas with you guys. Like, Christmas is this kind of a holiday. And it's like, that's fine. Go ahead. Like, you have that right. But now you don't have Christmas. You just have another weekday. It's the same thing with like a marriage certificate he was talking about. Like, people are like, oh, we don't need a marriage certificate. We don't need a piece of paper. And it's like, you can totally do it your own way. You know what I mean? But you're short-sighted. There's a short-sightedness to it. And it's it seems to you like you've got the full picture, but really there's a level of short-sightedness to it. And mostly that comes from, again, like in the Christmas situation, like, sure, you don't go to your family's house on Christmas, like, because you're making some point. Well, look at all the valuable time you lost with your family not going there on Christmas. The marriage certificate, it's like there's so much that a marriage certificate does for you in reality that and even in a ceremonial sense, that it's like, don't celebrate your marriage. Go ahead. Like, that's fine. But it's like you're downplaying some of these huge standard patterns of activity in the world that have been here forever. He says, don't believe in God. And he said, good luck filling in the hole. And that's the thing. I mean, like, that's what I was doing. I was improvising my way into having a big hole that wasn't there, that was now there. And again, it was like, all I was doing actually was like taking God out of the hole and putting something else in. And then I'd be like, and I put God back in. And I'd be like, well, let me do this again. Let me take it out. Let me be sure. And it's almost like I would say playing with electricity for the first time or fire. It's like you put your hand over a fire and you're like hot. You're like, whoa. Like, but that was crazy, but I want to do it again. You put your hand over it. You're like, whoa, okay. All right, that gets hot. And you put your hand over it a little closer. You're like, oh, damn, that is a crazy thing. And then all of a sudden you burn yourself. And that's what I was doing. It was like I'd fill that hole with something that eventually burned me. You know, at first it was just kind of warm and tingly and hot. And then I'd be like, whoa, that's kind of scary though. You know, that doesn't feel right. And then I'd put like God back in. And eventually, yeah, you just you definitely can create some trauma for yourself out of trying to fill that God-shaped hole in all of us with other things. The restorative aspect of Christianity is part of salvation that applies to the here and now on earth, that also applies to the eternal, that I think is so powerful. And how that applies eventually from a non-physical belief, a non-material belief, into reframing the neurology, the neurocircuitry in your brain, to me is another indicator of a creator. And going back to what I was talking about earlier about, you know, taking God out of this hole in me where he belonged and putting other things in there, and me building awareness around, okay, this is what it feels like with God. This is what it feels like without God. It seems very reasonable. Matter of fact, that's like a hermetic principle. And it seems like that's the part of the design, and that's where I think we really start at the 1 instead of the 0 when it comes to the design, because this idea that I need to take God out of this hole in me where he belongs and fill it with something else, and then I get to build awareness around the relationship I have to either having God in me or anything else that I put in me that's my own choice. And now I'm developing this awareness, and I'm actually growing closer to God now, because I've realized that when I fill it with things besides God, I feel terrible. And that is very true, that is how things work on earth, but that is not how we were created. We were created, that essentially is eating the apple and knowing that, you know, eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I put something bad in this hole, it doesn't feel great. I put God in this hole, oh, it feels good. That struggle right there is exactly why Jesus came. And that struggle right there is exactly why none of us ever would have been able to not do what Adam and Eve did. So this I don't want to, when I talk about God using any of my sins and bad choices and mistakes for him, for his kingdom, that's not me saying that's the way to go about doing things. Even though it's very common in this world that is the way that things are. That in itself, again, me, that was kind of like when I first started stealing, part of me was really stealing to see how I felt when stealing. So there was also like, there was a level of me learning from my choices that I was always actively applying to life, because I knew that, at least for me, that felt like the only way to justify making mistakes, and the most sincere way to deal with anything too that I like, any guilt or shame that I have over the past or my choices. It's like, okay, well, if I'm doing this to learn honestly, and I don't go back, and if I try my hardest to not have to learn these lessons over and over and over again, I'll feel good about the fact that I had to go through these things. And so when I started stealing, I was like, let me see how I feel about this. Now, what I should have done is just looked at the 10 Commandments and said, okay, well, you shouldn't steal. But what I did was I ate from the tree of the knowledge of, between good and evil, so that I could establish, was the Bible really right? Did I really was stealing really a sin? And I confirmed it because I felt guilty for stealing. And again, it's one way to learn. It's not necessarily, it's how a lot of people learn, but it's not how God calls us to learn. And so, let's see, where am I at now? Okay. So then they started talking about Rick Strassman, and they're doing IV. They're using IV to hook people up and give them DMT. And they're just doing like studies on that. And so then, Jordan Peterson talks about how all drugs of abuse, they have to do with either a fundamental, a motivational, or an emotional system. All drugs of abuse, deal with a fundamental, a motivational, or emotional system. Fundamental, how we just look at things. Motivational, what is the thing that, what's the spirit inside of us? What is the intention? And then the emotional, and that is what is the feeling. And that's why, it's so funny, they say God is love. Well, God is not, God is, there are lots of evil ways to show your love for someone that we would say it's love. That in God's eyes, it's evil, but we would say it's love. Okay, so God is only love in its purest sense. God is only love in the truest sense. God is not love in the sense that when we do, I could just think of like some like kink, some kind of a kink for people where like you could love, let's just say you could love heroin. God is love. You can love strippers. You can love sex. God is love. No, God is not people having an orgy. God's love is not orgy love. God's love is not free love. Well, in that sense, free from responsibility, free from, God created a particular kind of love and created it to look a certain way. So therefore, love is not free to corrupt itself and redefine itself. Now, the enemy does that, but that doesn't mean that he changed the meaning of love. He's just, it's a spiritual warfare, and it's a war on language. As far as the fundamental motivational or emotional systems that we run, and drugs, all drugs of abuse do this. I mean, all of this stuff ties back into also just like the neurocircuitry that we're laying with in our minds and our bodies with the things that we do all the time, which some of them are spiritual practices. I mean, it's like everyone has a physical practice or a responsibility to taking care of themselves physically, whether they do or not. Everyone's got a responsibility to take care of themselves religiously, whether they do or not. And, the part of the reason why we take the drugs is because it helps us with the fundamental motivational or emotional system. You have like pain relieving too. You have anxiety relieving, and you have motor stimulant, which is a great, I mean, come on, psychomotor stimulant. Sheesh, I want some of those. But yes, all of this is like I said before, he said, is a bottomless mystery. No one knows what to do. No one in the world knows what to do about this, right? No one knows the fact that people are having a similar experience with DMT, again, no one knows what to do about that. The fact that people are astral projecting or going through portals or this and that, no one knows who created those things. Could the devil create a counterfeit, let's just say simulation of his own reality inside of God's reality? I mean, isn't that what the devil's trying to do anyways? Isn't he trying to just get us to live in his upside down world and be chill with it? And for us to use him as a justification for the way things are in the way in which we align our values with that? Like no one knows what to do with the fact that drugs can induce a religious experience. And I go, yeah, well, how do we know what the proper amount to eat was? Do we need science to tell us, okay, the average person needs about 2,000 calories a day to just sustain their weight? Did we need science to tell us that? Or did people already kind of figure out, hey, if I eat this, it looks like I just stay the same? Oh man, I've been eating a lot more. I doubled what I was eating and I doubled in size this year. So the fact that drugs induce a religious experience doesn't tell us, it tells us less about drugs and more about religion. And again, there's so much there's so many things we don't know what to do with now. Like he said, that why are we running so quickly to opening Pandora's box? Like the 1960s. No one knew what I was thinking about that the other day. No one knew what to do. I was thinking about, okay, 1923 to 2023. And I was like, oh yeah, the 60s were wild. I mean, obviously you had other stuff going on and the Great Depression and everything, but like wars, but the 60s, as far as psychedelics, which seemed so relevant to my generation in the 80s, it just seemed like things had been like that forever, even though they had only been like that since the 60s. They'd only been like that maybe 24 years. By the time I was born, in my mind being born, it seemed like, man, it's been like that forever. But the reality is there are elements to what we're talking about that it is the same thing. This pharmakia, the line between, again, this guy that's thinking that all the incense and the oils and all these things have all these, they have psychoactive ingredients, and that's the main point to doing it. What's wild is when we, back then during those days, did the people think that in the temple, when they were burning the incense and they had the oil and cinnamon and all this stuff, did they think that it was those exact things doing the work for them? Or did they think God was doing the work? Did they think God was initiating everything, or did they think it was only because did they believe in the material compounds, molecular compounds, or was there something greater than material that activated what was happening? Again, that's why, like, when they're giving all these people the mushrooms and saying, okay, what do you think about, what's your worldview of religious leaders of different faiths? And people have whatever experience they have. Is that the mushroom, or is that the religious experience itself? And if it's the religious experience itself, do you need those things to have a religious experience? What is a religious experience? Are some religious experiences, just as important as others, and maybe do you feel them less? Kind of like what C.S. Lewis talks about in Screw Tape Letters. You know, the demon is telling Wormwood, the younger demon, hey, go for the new Christians at church. Go and distract them, and to the point where, because when people first go to church, right, they just feel God, they feel great, and then the enemy wants to distract you from that feeling, as though that feeling is the indicator of how close you are to that thing or not. What I knew before I ever took psychedelics and felt a synthetic form of what it felt like to be close to Jesus or the Holy Spirit or God, I had already felt that. It wasn't for as long, but also it was more real than the MDMA. I rather take a few seconds of that naturally induced closeness through just God's grace than I would the synthetic version that makes me feel like I'm there. And the catch is, I do believe that God was with me while I was on those experiences. I wanted him to be. I was seeking him. I was doing them to figure out if he would be there with me. And he was there with me. But just because he was there with me doesn't mean he wanted me to be there. But my point is, even when I don't feel close to God, I have experienced him enough, I've experienced him enough and know enough about him through reading his word and listening to other people, that just like distance is an illusion in like those, like with me and Sam, you know, no distance could come between how much I love her. It's the same thing with God. You know, distance is an illusion. Now we're talking about, you know, things that exist on an eternal level. So love is on an eternal level. But if I haven't seen Sam in a long time because I'm traveling and I haven't been able to talk to her and I start to feel distant from her, what do? Do I act like we're really distant? Or do I actually have faith in what we've built and what we've created and the trust that we have? And do I remain true to her despite not having those feelings? You don't even have to be long distance for that. I mean, in marriage, right? Eventually you go through phases where you don't feel all the warm fuzzies. And I just go, to me, just like the demon is trying to tempt the Christian, right? He's there in the church. He's like not feeling the warm fuzzies at church anymore. And the demon gets in there and he goes, all right, well, yeah, that's because this thing is fake. Now, if that Christian stays in church, then the demon knows, wait a second, this person's really on to something. This person's on to what's true. Despite not having those feelings, they're remaining true. So I don't need to feel Jesus all the time. You know, the heavy floods of feelings you get on psychedelics are beautiful, but the trickle of the steady trickling of a relationship with Jesus is far more powerful than the flooding. The steadily trickling of a relationship with Jesus over time is far more powerful and holistic for us than these huge floods of enlightenment that we get on psychedelics. And I'm not even saying that people shouldn't do psychedelics. That's not even my stance at all. I just don't want to see, I just get sad seeing people get tricked the same way. I mean, and it's hard not to. It's like watching your friend date a beautiful girl that has all types of issues from her family life, who's just like, you know, gorgeous Barbie doll girl who has messed up family, and your boy's dating her or you're dating her because she's just like, uh-oh, you're like, dang, she's into me. I never thought a girl like this would be into me because she's just so beautiful. Yet on the inside, she's just falling apart, and you're sitting there holding on for dear life because you just want, the idea of having a beautiful girl is something you've always wanted. So you just hold on to this idea and suffer. And I don't want people to do that with, I don't want my friends to do that with partners, but sometimes you got to learn the hard way. And I think sometimes people, I understand because I had to learn the hard way. God was gracious to me. My family was gracious to me. I'm never going to not be gracious to people. But you have a lot of these guys popping up like Aubrey Marcus and Joe Rogan and stuff that are just, sitting there saying like they're, spending a week in the dark and taking hero doses of psychedelics and doing sensory deprivation tanks and thinking these experiences are going to save them and set them up. Just like they're thinking the beautiful girl is just like, that's what they want to experience. Just a babe. And it's like, yeah, again, you need something of true substance, of true value to ground all the value. You need something to ground value. I guess that's what I'm saying. And the experiences themselves, like I've discussed about empiricism, they don't ground themselves. So what do we do? Where do we turn? We've talked about it before. Psychedelics aren't the end all be all to your restoration and to becoming, to having a more balanced and holistic life. Just tools, just simple tools, though they can feel like much more. Again, I just think I think that's another way that the enemy works. It's just like an overemphasis on feelings at the wrong time. I think we should put the right amount of emphasis on feelings at the right time. And there's definitely an under and over amount of emphasis that we can do at the wrong time as well. So the one thing he also talked about, he talks about openness, right? Because that's what ceremonies are about, is to get you to open. And so he was, I don't think he went into it. He just talked about how being low in openness has its advantages. But the hallmarks of openness are creativity, verbal fluence, and verbal IQ. And he talks about the 5 personalities, extrovert, and that's a positive emotion, neuroticism, negative emotion. Agreeableness is compassion versus predatory aggression, which is, I would love to get into that at some point. Then conscientiousness, which is like dutifulness or orderliness. And then openness, intellect, interesting ideas, creativity. Open people have a hard time, and I could definitely relate with all of this, as you guys will be able to tell. Okay, open people have a hard time catalyzing things with and with their identity. So it makes it hard to pursue one thing. And so that's man, ain't that the truth? I feel like I'm up there with some of the most open people. And that is one of my biggest strengths and weaknesses to hone. Great example of kind of the work that I enjoy doing, and kind of one of the points of the podcast, right, is to look into this whole, if you are an open person, how do you hone it and channel it in a holistic way. Let's see. People who are high in negative emotion are anxiety prone. And being open can be a curse. There's a psychological toll, for openness. And yeah, it's the uncertainty. And it was kind of like the same thing with anger too, right? I just loved how there's this concept of taxing your body physiologically and you just see it all the time in people, but I think again, you're taxing your body spiritually as well. But yeah, like I will definitely say that the uncertainty aspect, I mean, it's that concept, right? Being certain in your uncertainty. There's a level of self-control in that feels good. There's a level of like resting assured that you're going hard. You can rest assured because you're at least going hard by the fact that you're remaining open. Yeah, and like when you're angry, your body prepares for anything, and that's expensive. That's what he said. And I just, man, I shout out to Geo, bro, because I just thought of you. That he said, Jordan Peterson said, open people flip things upside down. It's dangerous, but also necessary. So, that's the other thing too, is it's like, he's talking about the best people he's ever met are dangerous people, but they keep themselves in check. I would have to say it's the same thing with open people, right? You are dangerous. It's you're not dangerous, but it's dangerous to be open. But I would, anytime you're doing something dangerous, the more self-control you have, the probably better you're going to perform. So then he just like, he now, and as far as like the being open is definitely, it's dangerous, but it's also necessary. And so now it brings us back to this part of his book where he's talking about casually criticizing social institutions or creative achievements. And we need both. So he's saying a social institution, social institutions become corrupt. And we need creative achievements to shake up the corruption. Point in case all the rioting that we saw recently or a couple years ago. And yeah, and it can get out of hand. Therefore, you need structures of tradition. And so there's this like part of like transformation, and then there's this structure of tradition and transformation of creativity, basically, is this balance that he's talking about. The structure of tradition versus the transformation of creativity. And you can't say who's right, but you can definitely talk about it. And I think he's just absolutely right about that. Let's say, so he's talking about psychedelics and openness. So you can be someone that's got like 50% openness, and then you take psychedelic, and then now you got like 85% of openness. And he's like, that's a major neurological rewiring. And he said it's such a major rewiring that it's stunning. And, he gave a Jung quote, which was, beware of unearned wisdom. And it's just interesting because, I definitely felt like a couple times on psychedelics, I took more than I could handle. I got more insight than I was almost ready for. But it was also tough because I felt like how I dealt with it, even though I didn't maybe earn it beforehand, after I got it, this wisdom, I felt like I did what I had to do to be responsible with it, which then deemed me, worthy of earning it or having it. And so, but it's true. I mean, like, goodness gracious. If I couldn't ultimately chalk up what I experienced to, a counterfeit reality, which the Bible has been clear of forever, or talked about forever, then I probably would have freaked out more, but walk through the valley of the shadow of death and fear no evil. I don't know, man. What is the valley of the shadow of death to you? Because for me, it was, walking into the infinite potential that was unjustified or ungrounded in any objective reality. I mean, it was like, there is no God. There's only stars and infinity. And but it wasn't just that, it was living in that, it was being able to participate in that reality that shook me cold, I think. Especially in the way that it opened me up in a way to this new potential, which changed the trajectory of what I thought would be the right value. Like, do we go towards the infinite potential, or do we stick to tradition? And I think that's exactly right. That's kind of what he was saying, like the social institutions, the tradition, but then the creative achievements is like the psychedelic breakthrough, which leads me back to my question I had a while ago on another podcast is, what's the difference? Like the salvation versus a breakthrough on psychedelics. They're not the same thing. One is a snapshot, is a snapshot of the mechanics, and one is the entirety, the whole picture. You want to sit there and say that, yeah, the reason why people were hearing from angels back in the Old Testament was because they were high. They were high on incense and oil and all, And we have, if you look at it from a scientific viewpoint now, it confirms it molecularly. Like it's good for that's good in a way in which it makes sense, right? Like, great, cool, but it doesn't philosophically address the issue. I go into the hospital and I got a lung infection, and they're running all these tests. Yeah, they can tell me I got a lung infection, but they can't tell me what caused it. They're trying to figure it out like crazy. Couldn't figure it out. Could not pinpoint it to one thing. So you're going to tell me that because you realized the molecular structures of these ingredients produces a psychoactive state of mind, that is the only thing that's happening here? Because that's as far as your science can take you? When I was in the hospital, there were people who thought that I was in the hospital because I had just really started going back to church and I had just started really giving my life back to the Lord. And so the enemy was getting to me. I mean, there were people who I had been praying for God to take the urge to smoke weed away from me. I mean, was it the enemy? Now, for me, I personally don't think so. Like, I think maybe the enemy could have tried to get to me in that situation, but I don't think the enemy caused it. I think, if anything, I caused it. Maybe it was smoking. Maybe it was working with bleach. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it was the fact that I was digging through the bins the day before, and my hands were probably filthy looking through those Goodwill bins. And then I had a hair on my lip or on my tongue, and I remember picking it off my tongue and then looking down at my hands and just being like, oh God, yeah, those were probably really filthy. Next day I got sick. The science can only tell us so much. That's my point. It's the same thing too with, like, I'll see with Sam, like, she'll be in a bad mood. And when I first met her, it was even worse. I had never really experienced this before with someone. She'd be in like a bad mood and she'd be like, oh man, it's the weather. Oh man, it's this. Oh man, it's like, I haven't eaten. Oh, I mean, like, literally there's so many reasons for her mood that it blew me away. And for me, I was always in a bad mood because I was spiritually being a bitch and I wasn't doing the work to have a good attitude. Like, I was sinning. Even if it was just in my outlook on life, my spiritual, just like my attitude, you taking out the trash with joy and love for the Lord, or are you doing it begrudgingly because you have to? The huge difference. And are you being moral because you're afraid of getting caught, or are you being moral because you believe it's the right thing to do? And it's a huge choice as well. I mean, you get to choose. Yeah, and if you choose to not do it with joy, well, man, if you don't think it's a choice for you, then you've given up more power to something. There's a belief you hold that is not worthy of the power in which you place upon it. You know, you have a belief in something, so you need to do some sort of a work to pinpoint what is it that you're putting your belief and faith in. What kind of truly valuable principles, ideals are you placing your faith in? Okay, you have these principles and these values and these ideals, right? And you're putting those on something in faith. What is that thing that you're placing those on in good faith that is not worthy of the faith that you put into it? It's not reliable. That's how you lose your power, in the sense of you can't choose to have a good attitude to take out the trash or not. Now, it's not just you, because the thing that has to, the will, the thing that's motorizing the motor for your will to go and flow and do anything is God's grace. So that is the thing that powers you to be able to do things with a good attitude when you don't want them to. Other things that I think, like smoking weed for me was a big thing for that. It was like, oh, I don't feel like doing it. Oh, I'll smoke some weed. Okay, I'll be fine. I'll make the best out of a shitty situation and smoke some weed. No. Like, God doesn't want you to make the best of a shitty situation. Like, that's funny because he really does, actually. But he doesn't want you to see the situation as shitty to begin with. That's I guess more what I'm saying. It's kind of like Paul when he's locked up in prison, and just his outlook of being a prisoner and why he's a prisoner and just how much peace he has about it. So that's what I mean by giving up your power. Like, for me, it's like either way, you're going to give up your power to idols, or you're going to give up your power to the Lord. You know, you can give your power to yourself too. That's an idol. Like you can be your own idol. I mean, you can, so much. You can idolize certain, values. But back to going back to the point, where they're giving, mushrooms to, people who are terminally ill. Is it the mushroom that is affecting them, or is it the religious experience? And I had asked earlier, I had asked, are some religious experiences equally important, even though you feel them less? And I think that's how we got here originally, was that it's not, see, everyone's all stoked about the feeling great on psychedelics. And don't get me wrong. I mean, like, God is gracious and people are resilient, and, people can, even myself, I can benefit from some bad choices, but that's because of God's grace. It's like, it's not the way you want to continue to learn if you can help it. But I was just thinking, like, so the difference between psychedelics and then religious experiences is that this idea of defining religious experiences is very interesting, because any spiritual practice is a religious experience. I think when you say a religious experience, I think we mean like this awe confirming, experience, right? Where we just like completely feel in the presence of God. But that does not mean that when, you know, my dad, fainted on stage preaching like a few weeks ago and in front of the church. And, the ambulance came and took him and he had a blood clot forming and, they did emergency surgery on him. And I just remember praying and I remember feeling the fear, just like, oh shoot, what's going to happen? Like the unknown. But I also remember anytime a thought like of this being a really bad situation, a life-changing situation, that thought came in and out of my head fairly quickly. And I could feel like that was God protecting me. That was God just being like, sure, yeah, you could have that feeling, but trust in me. And, my dad ended up getting out of the hospital the same day. They caught this blood clot early. So he didn't, even though he fainted, it wasn't an official stroke. And so and he had ridden, he's like 68 years old. He had ridden a 102-mile bike marathon. And yeah, so the day before, and then he like got up and preached the next morning. And it's like, okay, I don't think that situation I was like, oh, I feel God. Oh, this is great. Ooh, warm fuzzies. I'm so connected to everything around me. No, but I did have peace in a otherwise like tough situation. And to me, that's a religious experience. Like me praying and having a change of heart, that's a religious experience. Me forgiving somebody and giving that to God, that's a religious experience. So all you people who are trying to like cheapen religion and then go out there and have yourself a spiritual experience, it's like you guys are cheating the system completely. You guys are not even, you're not even looking at how the system works. It's like you're just showing up trying to just claim what's yours. It's almost like you're getting this crazy inheritance, right? You're the prince or the princess, and they're showing you all these things that are now yours, and you're just like, give them to me. Like you're so thinking about yourself that you're not even thinking about how the fact that where you're moving, the position you're moving into, affects so many other people. And so you're spoiled. Are some religious experiences equally important, though you feel them less than some of the other ones? Yes, there are. You're supposed to thank God for your trials. Someone once told me, it's easy to be Buddha on the mountain, right? It's easy to go up in the mountains and be away from everybody and take your psychedelics and turn into a god and a Buddha, and you're gonna, and it happens all the time. You could go to a church convention and for the weekend, or a men's retreat for the weekend, and come back on fire for the Lord, right? And so there's still the reality of the situation, though. Where are we now, and how do we integrate any dreams that we have for ourselves, or any potential, any growth? And it's like, that's the real work. I heard on a podcast the other day, it was like about startups. It was like, ideas mean nothing, in the idea world. And it's like the execution is everything. But again, my point is saying that it's easy to be Buddha on the mountain. It's easy to thank God when things are going good. It's easy to thank God when you feel God. It's easy to believe in God when you when, when you feel them. It's not so easy when you don't. And if we're basing it all off just this like kind of like sensory, experiential, vibrational thing, then we're going to miss out on the reality of the situation, which is that this transcends what it means to be comfortable, what it means to be safe. I mean, this is a new definition, a paradigm shift in what comfort looks like and security looks like. And I mean, even conviction, because you should have the spiritual fortitude. Again, you have a choice to be in a good mood when you take out the trash. So if you're someone that you struggle with this, but also you can eventually get grateful, but you're still harping on yourself because you're like, there's a lot of time, you're like 50-50, or like you're like pissed halfway. Once you take the trash out, you're angry, and then when you come back in, you're like, that wasn't so bad. Like, just keep paying attention. You got your whole life ahead of you. You're going to be 60, 70, 80. And even if it's then when you are like, wow, feels good to walk and take out my own trash. Like, that will be, those are rewards, like you do the work now so that your older self thanks you. And if you're someone that does psychedelics and you go from 50% openness to 85% openness, what are you using that extra 35% of openness on now? You've got the shift in openness, but you almost need a religious experience to ground the openness in. I just don't see the shift in openness being something separate than or being like from an ontological standpoint. I see again the religious nature of what's happening coming before we ever get into the science. And some religious experiences are not good. They're demonic. They're bad. Some religious experiences are sold to us as good, even though they're bad. Like the devil masquerades as an angel of light. So the shift in openness, really is just a shift in opening up new potential. You still are accountable for what you use that potential on, or what you fill that potential with. So you better get into studying a religious sort of a practice, because that's the best way to figure out, as far as from an experiential standpoint, that's one of the best ways to figure out, to start navigating what's true. Because what's true is going to set you free. It's going to be the thing that gives you peace when you are in prison, when you're wrongfully accused of something, and so what you have to go out there and see what is worth. Like I said, if you don't believe you have a choice in whether you can take out the trash with a good attitude or not, it's because it ties back into this. It's because you've chosen to ground your beliefs in a religious something that you have no idea what it is. And it's maybe because you don't think you're a religious person. Maybe it's because you think religion is stupid. Okay, and if I'm getting this right, I just have narrative, religious, meaningful, and we don't understand it in science. So I think he was saying he sees like kind of like a weaving of narrative, religious, like narrative, religion, and meaningfulness and values. And there's there's a way in which they all relate to each other that science can't Explain. Which, you know, again, that's why this is such an important conversation, because I think there's going to be a lot of people, Christians, who are going to be like, you know, rightfully so. They're going to be the traditional part of things that say, hey, we don't want this new thing to get out of hand. And so they're going to be sus of it. And rightfully so, because there's just so much like this. It is Pandora's box. You don't know there's nothing is guaranteed. It's a risk, you know? But making a bigger deal out of this than we need to is also harmful. You know, it's a delicate conversation that needs to be had, because, you know, one thing, all this stuff is I mean, this is something that people will be called heretics for, will be called, you know, false teachers for. This is definitely going to be a topic that it's going to seem like it's a doctrine, an essential doctrine, as opposed to one to discuss and defend. You know, this is going to seem like a doctrine to die for. And it seems to me like it's not. It seems to me like this is less. If we made a big deal about this, then it's going to turn into a monster. If we actually treat this like, hey, this is an area in which God, like, he already makes us responsible for how much food we eat, the kind of sex we have, and, you know, how much wine we drink. So this is just another thing in which we're responsible for managing managing our conduct in. But people are going to demonize this just like they demonize, it is crazy when you see in certain Christianities, and I didn't make this point, someone else made this observation though, where here that we're dropping bombs on other countries. We're doing all these things, right? That America, that we feel like we have to do, right? Which on some level it does make us safe, right? But it's like, this is not the king. The kingdom of God is not America. And you have all these Christians that are, again, somehow justifying horrific things while looking at other Christians who are cussing and being like, well, you cuss, so you're not, filled with the Spirit. And it's the same thing, I think, here with psychedelics. I mean, you can't, I'm not making a case for psychedelics for even large, like, crazy experiences. Although we can talk about ibogaine and we can talk about solutions, how that's a solution for resetting the neural pathways in your brain for people who are addicted to hardcore substances. It's like, that's like a 3-day purging process. And it's like, in that case, doesn't it seem worth it? You just like shit and throw up and cramp up probably and sweat and sleep and whatever for 3 days. And then when you're done, you feel like a brand new person. Like, that's the only option some people have. But even doing that, again, okay, so what, you neurologically, you're back at square one. Okay, well, I hope you start with the right foundation. I hope you start with the right building block. I hope you start at the zero this time. But it's hypocritical for people to be taking, a Valium, any over-the-counter medication, any pain relievers, any mood suppressors or depression medication or any of that stuff. If you're a Christian and you're taking that stuff and you think that someone microdosing mushrooms for their depression is worse than you, I would love to hear how you come to that conclusion and how you justify that logically. How fair are you being in holding in the account in the accountability that you hold others to and yourself to? I think it's incredibly dangerous, right, to do psychedelics like we've talked about. So I think the other most important thing, though, if you are going to do them, is going to be like, okay, what are the steps afterwards? And I think that's where we as a community, I don't know, should at least be having the conversation. I'd rather someone go and do MDMA, assisted therapy, and then, they have a crazy situation, and then they go and they talk to some fellow Christians about it, and they read the Bible about it, then they go to an astrologer. I mean, do you want what do you, because it's still a choice, guys. It doesn't change the fact that no matter what we do, eventually we still just have to choose to obey Jesus or not. And I am coming up on almost 2.5 hours, and it is going to be family time here, house and family time. So I still got some more notes. We're going to talk about DMT, the DMT realm. Is the tree of life really, in the middle of chaos and order, like Jordan Peterson says? And, do shamans go up and down the same tree of life that was in the Garden of Eden? Or is there such thing as a counterfeit tree of life that, shamans could be going up and down? So we'll talk more about that here when we continue. All right. Bye.